Hi, I'm Femi OK. You're watching The Stream. In today's episode, we ask the question, are humans alone in the universe? Avi Loeb is a professor of science at Harvard University. He joins us to talk about that particular subject, plus his new book, Extraterrestrial, the first sign of intelligent life beyond Earth. I have been reading this book for my research. I started to turn down the pages whenever I found anything interesting. Every other page is turned down. I know you will have questions as well. Jump into the YouTube comment section and you too can be part of today's discussion.
The reasons for me to buy this book, basically it's like brain candy. It's like junk food for the brain. Because there's always this nagging question, what is out there? We may never know. But to have these thought experiments, that is always fascinating to me, has been to me ever since I was a child. I'm 39 years old now, so I'm an old fart, but I still love science. It keeps the mind going and it keeps you wondering, and that's where this comes into play. It still keeps you wondering. It doesn't have all the answers, but it is food for thought.
Well, that's one way to make our guests smile. Professor Loeb, welcome to The Stream. So good to see you. Who did you write your book for? Who is it for?
Well, thank you for having me. I wrote the book for the young generation who I hope will occupy the halls of academia in the future, because young people do not carry a prejudice, they don't carry biases, they're not attached to their ego as much as senior people are. And frankly, I told the publisher that if a person around the world will decide to become a scientist after reading my book, I will be satisfied. It so happened that a couple of weeks ago, I received an email from Malawi, Africa, from a woman that said, your book is great. I'm contemplating becoming an astronomer after reading it. And that made me satisfied already. There was another one from Colombia in Latin America, an undergraduate student who said, reading about your work changed my life. There was another one from a lawyer in Palo Alto who said similar things. So I'm quite satisfied.
But Professor Loeb, I'm looking at an article that you wrote. Why do we assume extraterrestrials might want to visit us? So here's the question that a lot of people are wondering, and you wonder in your book. Are we alone?
Right. And my suspicion is that we are not. That, in fact, things like us existed for billions of years, because most stars formed billions of years before the sun. And the sun is a typical star, and half of the sun-like stars have a planet the size of the Earth, roughly at the same separation. So if you arrange for similar circumstances, you might as well get similar outcomes. I don't think that we are special. I don't think that we deserve special attention like many other people think. When my daughters were young, they were at home and they thought very highly of themselves. They thought that they must be, the smartest in the world, that they are the center of the world. But then when we took them to the kindergarten, they realized there are smarter kids around. And our civilization will mature once we meet others. We tend to think very highly of ourselves. The ancient Greek philosopher Aristotle suggested that we are at the center of the universe, and people believed him for 1,000 years. Until Copernicus and Galileo realized that the Earth moves around the sun. And it still took a while before people accepted that. So I think, we are not at the center of anything, and we should look out and find others.
I'm just looking here. Hasnan Hussein, who is watching you right now on YouTube, says, of course there is intelligent life beyond this Earth. How could we be the only ones? What I am wondering, though, Professor, is our exposure to science fiction over many years and how that impacts, even how scientists view the idea of extraterrestrial life. What does that do?
Right. So science fiction, I think, plays a very important role in expanding our imagination as to what we might expect out there. I have a problem with most of the storylines in science fiction. I'm not a fan of science fiction. I'm a fan of science or fiction separately, but I do value the the fact that science fiction expands our horizons. The reason I don't like many of the storylines is because they violate the laws of physics very often. But other scientists, because of the attention of the public to science fiction and to reports about unidentified flying objects and so forth, they shy away from discussing this topic. They say, it's too popular, it's controversial, we don't want to discuss it at all. And my point is simple. If you go back to ancient history, there were people claiming that the human body has a soul and that we should not engage in anatomy. And imagine if scientists would say, oh, this subject of the human body is controversial. Some people claim it has a soul, some not, and we don't want to discuss it. Just like the response to science fiction. What would happen with modern medicine? Where would we be? I think, in fact, science has an obligation to attend to a topic that is of great interest to the public and clear it up using the scientific method, using equipment, telescopes that we have. Are we the smartest kid on the block? That's a very fundamental question.
Christopher Sharp has a question for you, Professor. Have a listen, have a look.
I'm a huge fan of yours, and I believe that you're inspiring a new generation of scientists to actively follow their curiosity without fearing stigma from the scientific community. My question relates to UFOs. So, as you may now know, the US government is actively investigating UFOs and is taking the phenomena seriously. Avi, what is your opinion of UFOs? And if asked to by the US government to help them in their investigations, what would your response be?
Yes, that's an excellent question. And what I think we should rely on is really the very best cameras and audio sensors that we have at our hands right now, rather than on old reports from the Pentagon that are being declassified, because they were not using the very best instruments and they're based partly on eyewitness testimonies. It's obvious why the US government was classifying these reports, because there was always the concern that they might represent technologies that other nations possess and pose a national security risk. But from the point of view of science, what we would like to understand is, are there unusual phenomena that represent perhaps something else? And for that purpose, all we need to do is deploy the very best cameras and audio sensors in the same locations and record everything we see. You see, science is about reproducibility of results. You have to reproduce results in order to believe them. There is the old biblical story of Abraham that heard the voice of God and that told him to sacrifice his only son, Isaac. And, if Abraham had a cell phone with a voice memo up, he could have pressed the button and recorded the voice of God, and then we would all believe it. But given the fact that he didn't have a cell phone, we have to decide whether we believe this testimony or not. And I think, it's much better to focus on how we get reliable evidence in the future rather than look at documents that were based on old equipment. And I'm very open-minded if I'm asked to lead a group of people that will perform scientific experiments in the same locations, recording the sky and looking for unusual phenomena. I would be very interested in checking this out. It's just the way we do science. We look for evidence, we are guided by evidence, and we should not be guided by prejudice.
I love that you talk about looking for unusual phenomena, which brings me to something that was spotted in 2017. That something is on my laptop, surrounded by a little blue circle. Professor, for those of us who are new to this, tell us what you're seeing, what they're seeing, and what your hypothesis is that this is.
Yeah, this is an object, the first one that was discovered near the Earth that came from outside the solar system. It's sort of like finding an object in your backyard that came from the street. And it may have taken a long time to get here, and it saves you the trip of going to the street and figuring out what's going on there. And this is the very first one that we noticed in our vicinity. It was given the name Oumuamua because it was discovered by a telescope in Hawaii. And Oumuamua means a scout in the Hawaiian language. And at first, astronomers thought, well, it must be just like the rocks we have seen before in the solar system, either a comet or an asteroid. The problem was that it didn't have any cometary tail, no gas or dust around it. Also, as it was spinning around every 8 hours, its brightness changed by a factor of 10. And that implied that it has a very extreme shape, most likely flat, so pancake shaped. So it's just like a piece of paper tumbling in the wind. And then it exhibited an excess push away from the sun that can only be explained in terms of reflection of sunlight pushing it. And in September 2020, we saw another object that exhibited the same kind of push by reflecting sunlight and no cometary tail. Turns out that that object, which was called 2020 SO, is actually a rocket booster that we launched in 1966 in a lunar lander mission. And we know that we produced it artificially. The question is, who produced Oumuamua?
So let me put that question back to you, because this is why there's been such a big scientific debate around you asking who produced Oumuamua, because you are saying possibly, Professor, fill in the blank.
An alien civilization, a technological civilization. You know, for the past 70 years, we've been searching for radio signals and we didn't get any. That's just like trying to have a phone conversation. You need the counterpart to be alive. We cannot have a phone conversation with the Mayans, with the Mayan culture, because it's not around anymore. But we can find evidence that it existed in archaeological digs. We can find relics that they left behind. And in much the same way, we can do space archaeology. We can look for equipment that was sent into space, just like we sent Voyager 1, Voyager 2, New Horizons, and it's floating out in space. Every now and then, there would be a piece of equipment that we will discover in our vicinity. It's just like walking on the beach and every now and then seeing a plastic bottle among the rocks that are naturally produced. And of course, the way to tell the difference between a plastic bottle and a rock in space is to send a spacecraft that will come close to it and take a close-up photograph. They say a picture is worth 1,000 words. And in my case, a picture is worth 66,000 words, the number of words in my book.
So, Professor, you sound extremely logical right now, but you started up a huge storm of controversy, and other scientists said with quite a lot of determination that you are absolutely wrong in your hypotheses. Let me introduce you to one of them. This is Caitlin.
As a representative of the astronomical community, myself and many others disagree with Dr. Loeb's assessment of Oumuamua as an extraterrestrial space probe. The science just isn't there. Yes, Oumuamua is from interstellar space. Yes, it has an odd shape. Yes, it experienced non-gravitational acceleration as it passed by our sun. But all of these things have natural explanations. Collisions between planetary bodies are very common in the universe, and nitrogen outgassing has been shown to be a viable explanation for why Oumuamua accelerated as it passed by our sun. So what I think we're really looking at is just a visiting chunk of another solar system, Pluto.
Right. So there were various suggestions that Oumuamua is a natural object. And the latest one among them is a nitrogen iceberg hypothesis, that it's an object made of pure nitrogen. And before that, there was a suggestion that it's an object made of pure hydrogen. And we just can't see the cometary tail because it's transparent. For hydrogen, the problem is that we showed it in a scientific paper that it would evaporate very quickly. An object of the size of a football field will not last very long and couldn't survive the journey. For a nitrogen iceberg, and that's a hypothesis that was published just a week ago, I'm currently writing a paper showing that you just can't make enough of them to explain Oumuamua. There would be too few by orders of magnitude compared to what you need from a population whose members are abundant enough to explain an object like that. Because if you think about it, the idea is that it's a chunk of frozen nitrogen that you can make on the surface of planets like Pluto, which are, a small component in the solar system. And so the chance of that happening is really small, that you chip off the surface of a planet like Pluto, and that you have enough Plutos for every star. What you need is thousands of Plutos for every star, such that you have enough chunks of nitrogen to explain Oumuamua. And there are other hypotheses that maybe it's a cloud of dust particles that is 100 times less dense than air. The problem with that is, as it gets close to the sun, it will be heated by hundreds of degrees, and then it will not maintain its integrity. So all of these natural explanations invoke something that we have never seen before. And my point is simple. If we invoke something that we've never seen before, we must keep on the table the possibility that it's artificial in origin. And the fact that this is controversial just reflects on my colleagues, not on me. I'm just following the standard scientific procedure where I put all possibilities on the table without prejudice.
Professor, I feel like I've just experienced what it's like to hear trash talk from a professor of science at Harvard University. There has been a lot of controversy that continues, and new theories that your work has inspired. One of them, and you just mentioned this one, this is from the Smithsonian Magazine, or they shared this new theory suggesting that Oumuamua is a nitrogen ice pancake. We spoke to a professor of astrophysics who actually subscribes to this. Now, I would love you, when I play this, to explain what he is asking and challenging you on before you reply to it, because it's a little complicated. Have a look, have a listen.
I've been funded by NASA for a long time to help devise strategies for looking for alien life on exoplanets. And it's by trying to understand the geochemical cycles on these planets and eliminating false positives. And every astronomer I've worked with, we're all confident that we're going to find evidence of alien life, maybe even within our lifetimes. But we know that we're going to do this by eliminating false positives. And the same with Oumuamua. We have to eliminate all the natural explanations first. No responsible scientist is going to look at Oumuamua and say it's alien technology if there are reasonable natural explanations, like an N2 ice fragment off of the chunk of an exopluto.
Yeah, so Stephen is one of the authors of the recent two papers that were published last week, arguing that maybe Oumuamua is a chunk of pure nitrogen. And for this scenario to work, you cannot allow carbon, for example, to be associated with that iceberg, because the Spitzer Space Telescope put very tight limits on any carbon-based molecules in the vapor that came out of Oumuamua, if at all. So there was no carbon. And the claim is, okay, maybe it's just pure nitrogen. And one environment where you find pure nitrogen with very little carbon is the surface of Pluto, a very thin veneer. Less than 1% of the mass of Pluto on the surface is made of pure nitrogen. So the proposal is that you just scrape off the surface of Pluto-like planets around other stars. You create chunks, and what we are seeing is the first interstellar object. Oumuamua was one of these chunks. The thing that you have to keep in mind is we have never seen a nitrogen object in the solar system. So we have the so-called Oort cloud of, about 1 billion objects larger than Manhattan Island in the periphery of the solar system. And all thousands of those examples of objects that we saw from that environment of the solar system were made of icy rock, the kind of things we find on Earth. Rocks, including carbon, including water on their surface in the form of ice. And that's what we've seen thousands of times. We've never seen a pure nitrogen chunk. And, so it's something that we have never seen before. And we are supposed to believe that more than anything artificial and dismiss the artificial possibility based on that. And the other thing is, carbon and nitrogen are produced in stars by the same process. And usually, there is one example of a nitrogen-rich comet that we have seen that the authors of this paper are mentioning. And that one actually shows also evidence for carbon. So I rest my case. Whenever, typically you get carbon together with nitrogen. And why would you scrape off the surfaces of Pluto-like objects and create the vast majority of interstellar objects this way, or a substantial fraction of interstellar objects this way, rather than have the majority of them being rocks like we find in the solar system? All I'm saying is, we look at our backyard, we see rocks. Then you tell me, in the street, there are very different type of objects, actually nitrogen pure. And I say, okay, well, maybe, that's a possibility, but it's certainly not an appealing possibility.
Let me show our audience this picture. This is Galileo, the Italian astronomer. He was a physicist, he was a philosopher as well, going up against the church. The church were furious at his idea of what our solar system looked like. He was right, they were wrong. You mention this in your book. Are you a modern-day Galileo?
Well, that's a good question. It really depends on the response of the community. I am just like basketball players, I keep my eyes on the ball, not on the audience. I don't care how many likes I have on Twitter and what the response of the personal attacks that people launch at me. That really is irrelevant, because we have to look at the evidence. And if it looks anomalous and the artificial origin appears to be more likely than things that we've never seen before, then I advocate for that. Once we get more evidence, I basically say, let's take a photograph of the next object that would be looking as weird as Oumuamua. We will learn something new no matter what, because even the natural origin ideas, like the one we just heard about a nitrogen iceberg, even they talk about something that we've never seen before. So there must be factories of objects that we've never seen before. Let's figure them out by getting more evidence. That's my advocacy. And the only reason we will not get that evidence is if you listen to those people that say, it's always rocks, it's never aliens. To me, they remind me of a caveman that plays with rocks all of his life and then presented with a cell phone and arguing a cell phone must be just a shiny rock.
Professor, you have just insulted so many of your peers and colleagues. I am enjoying this immensely. Salman on YouTube says, remaining skeptical is so important. Rich says, if we knew the truth about aliens, it would change everything that we've learned. One more thought here, and that is the idea of, from Sabi, who says, what should we expect from the future? Will extraterrestrial life ever come to visit us here on our Earth? And that thought is a very quick thought, Professor, because we're right at the end of the show, and I'm going to give you 1 minute. Go ahead.
Yeah, it's very important. It's a very important question. And Enrico Fermi, a famous physicist, asked, where is everybody? I think it's presumptuous of us to expect them to visit us. We should go out and search for them. We are not that significant. We are not that important. It reminds me of the friends of my wife. When I met her, they were waiting for Prince Charming on a white horse to come and make them a marriage proposal. It never happened. We shouldn't expect that, of others to appreciate us. We should go out and search. And, frankly, we are born into this world like actors put on a stage without a script. The first thing to check is, are there other actors around? We can ask them what the play is about.
Thank you so much, Professor Avi Loeb. Extraterrestrial, the first sign of intelligent life beyond Earth. That is his new book. It is extremely controversial. Enjoy digging into that and then come to your own conclusions. Professor Avi Loeb, thank you for being on the stream today. Really enjoyed your company. Signing off. See you next time. Thanks for watching, everybody. Take care.